Namaste, everybody. Welcome to today's discussion with Revanth Pothukuchi. Here are some things about Revanth before we get started. Revanth graduated in 2021 amid the COVID-19 pandemic. He went to North Creek High School in the North Shore School District in Bottle, Washington. In his time in high school, Revanth was valedictorian and co-president of North Creek High School's TSA club. He has participated in many competitions and won many. Some of these include TSA. He won 5th in nationals for coding, first place in the state of Washington for coding, and webmasters. Also, in the past 4 years, he has created his own programming language. Um, he will be going to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology soon, famously known as MIT, this coming fall. He plans on getting a Bachelor's of Science degree on computer science. On behalf of Women Icon, we are thrilled and honored to be moderating this event in which Revanth will be answering questions, sharing experiences, tips, and tricks about the pathway of success from high school to college. So, without further ado, please let's welcome Revanth. Welcome, Revanth. Um,
Hi, it's really nice to be here and thanks for inviting me.
yeah, thank you for coming. Okay. In this session, we will be covering the topics of planning extracurriculars, writing college essays, preparing college lists, talking about test scores, high school experiences, and finally, the Q&A session. So first of all, Revanth, congratulations on getting into MIT. So if everyone's ready, we can get started. Okay. So I wanted to begin with asking you about your extracurricular activities and how you plan them. So what were some methods which you used to plan your extracurriculars? What methods did you choose? Why some extracurriculars were worthwhile and significant?
All right, so I think for me, the best way to plan what I did in high school was thinking about my interests in general. I think the most obvious of interests that I had were programming and computer science. And so I chose to pursue that line of work through many different facets, such as competitions, which TSA was one of them, also known as Technology Student Association. I took the route of personal projects with a personal programming language that I made from scratch. I also worked on different forms. So I also taught a programming class during the pandemic. And so I think the best way that the best method that I could share to others is try to identify your passions and your interests, and then find different ways of expressing that kind of interest.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't mind, could you just recap all the extracurriculars you just listed? So you were in TSA, you did your own programming language, and are there any others?
Yeah, so in addition to that, as I mentioned, I taught a programming class. I've co-authored a research paper on the effects that the moon has on the human. And then I've also worked on different projects such as FBLA, which is a club in school. And so it stands for Future Business Leaders of America, which is more of a business and STEM oriented club. And I've also interacted with this club outside of school known as Youth in Government. And so this is a club where I get to express my both my leadership abilities and exercise my governmental duties. So I get to interact with how to create a bill, how to create legislation, how to pass legislation, the entire process from the beginning of writing the bill to drafting it and then working and revising on it, and then at the end proposing it to legislature and then passing it on to the governor. And so these were some of the extracurricular activities that I had on my application.
Just one more question. Where did you do the youth in government outside of school? Was it?
Yeah, so I did that as a part of YMCA, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's a local nonprofit organization.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Next, we would like to talk about college essays. And please tell us how the process, how you wrote your essays and the process of picking topics to write about.
Yeah, so I think one of the most central themes that I touched upon is passion. And you'll see me repeat this over and over again. I think that passion is perhaps the most significant aspect of college admissions from a high level, perspective. I think what colleges really look at is how passionate are you from, what you want to do and what you have been doing, and then will you continue that in the future? And so it's when you're looking at it from what I should do in high school and what I should do in middle school, that's not the real perspective that you should be taking, I think. And so to tie that back into essays, they're looking for you to divulge your experiences that you've done in middle school and that you've done in high school, and how those experiences that you've had over time shaped your reality and the way that you think about the world around you. And so this, some of this comes into the experiences, the interaction that you have between people, and then some of this also comes into play with what you've actually done in your work. And so the biggest tip that I can give is one has to be truly passionate with what they're doing. And if you really are that passionate about what you're talking about, it's very easy to write an essay. For example, let me share one of my stories. So one of my MIT essays consisted of writing what I like to do in my free time. And so for this essay, I talked about the idea of solving puzzles and riddles as one of my interests and what I used to do in my free time. And this was truly something that was near and dear to my heart. And it was really easy to talk about something that was super expressive and that portrayed who I was as a person from an outsider's perspective, while at the same time remaining brief. And I think that balance there is extremely important. Finding something that you can talk about to great lengths while at the same time limiting yourself to the word limit is truly one of the biggest challenges of college essays. But as I said before, it becomes fairly easy if you're able to identify what you like to do and then just talk about it in a very free-form manner. I think it's one of the best solutions that we have, and it's very easy to express yourself with very vivid details about the surrounding situations, about the emotions that you felt during that time, about how that changed your perspective on how you think about everyday tasks, how you approach problems, that you face in your life and in general, and how you face other people's problems. And so I think that would probably be the best way to find topics. It's just to find something that interests you and write about it.
So your common theme was about your passion for computer science. So how did your extracurriculars come in with this? You definitely taught computer science or coding classes, you won competitions, but something interesting that I thought about was the moon phases and also the youth in government. Did you include that in your essays?
I did, yeah. So I think at the same time, it's important to realize that personally for me, I have varied interests. Like I'm not a single trick pony. I have multiple things that I like, and I need to express this in multiple outlets. Like I can't tie everything back to computer science. And I think that's one misconception that people have. It's that people or college students or high school students need to have a single point of focus and put all the energy they have into that one point. But the problem is when you do that or when you follow that approach, it becomes hard to identify who you are outside of that realm. You're nothing but a shell in some sense, right? You just have that one point and then you have no other interest. And so when you have that diversification in your portfolio, it adds to your uniqueness, it adds to your personality, and it also gives you diverse knowledge about the world around you. Because we live in a society that's extremely diverse in not only the topics that we talk about, but also the ideas that we share. And so having this diverse view of the world around you and in the interests that you have and when you write, it provides you better opportunities for success in college.
Okay. So we've often heard that well-roundedness is something to be desired, but often it's confused. Well-roundedness is confused with not having a certain focus on anything. What's your take on that?
I think it's important to strike a balance between the two. It's important to have that mix, but at the same time, it's important to remain strong in your foundations. You can't leave your foundations weak at any point of time because it's important that you understand that you're going to be building off of that foundation. And so when we refer to well-roundedness, we're essentially referring to that structure that you have behind your passions, your interests, and your regular schoolwork. For example, in school, we have many different subjects. We have math, we have English, science, social studies, and on and on. And most schools require this. Most of these classes are requirements in high schools. And the sole reason for that is it builds a strong foundation of skills that are important for later success. For example, English builds the ability for you to analyze details within, any arguments or in the world around you. It gives you the lens with which you can use to identify the details and the intricacies of the perspective that you're using. And then if you take a look at science, it builds the idea of creativity and curiosity. And this is important because life is just a long journey where you're going to be continuously learning things. And maintaining that curious behavior is important to succeed in not only college, but in life after college, where you're going to be having that curiosity and growing in many different streams. And then if you look at math, it continues on that analytical approach where you're able to solidly define and prove many different things. And it's a foundational skill for any job that you look at afterwards as well. And so all of these skills that you develop in these core classes adds to that well-roundedness. And I think many, as you said, confuse this for well-roundedness in your overall application. We're looking for well-roundedness in your foundations with a spike in your application.
Please remember to mute. The Q&A session is at the end of the event. Okay. Thank you for the insightful talk about college essays and staying focused on certain things about having a diverse foundation of sorts. Often people have a list of colleges they're looking to get into, or they have a college list. What was the case for you? Did you also have such a list?
I did, but I think the approach that I took to constructing a college list is slightly different than what typical students would approach. The way that I took this problem is, I think most people confuse having a list of colleges to be a goal. Like they associate having that list of colleges to be the goal of colleges that they want to go to. People often beat themselves up for not going to that top school or not getting in. But I think it's instead a different perspective that I took. The way that I took college admissions was I need to go to the college that provides the best resources, the best opportunities for me to succeed in my passions and developing those passions further. So the way that I approach this is finding colleges which had those resources. For example, MIT had excellent resources in terms of the faculty, in terms of the students that were there and the ideas that they had, the research that was going on, the overall programs in place that they had, and opportunities for internships and other sorts. And these kind of opportunities, which related, to the computer science field, they were extremely influential in me choosing to apply to that school in the first place. I had this when I was a kid. I would often confuse colleges with the name and the brand that they had associated with them. So I would say, oh, I want to go to MIT, or I want to go to Stanford, just because it sounded really cool to other people. But I think later on, I learned that colleges, they shouldn't be looked at that perspective. Because if you take that perspective, once you attain that goal, you're done. You don't have any other goal to look forward to, and you can't grow as a person, as an individual. And it's hard for you to ever really escape that grasp once you start looking at that perspective. And so instead, it's important and necessary for you to shift that perspective to start analyzing, what are the real benefits of me going to that college as opposed to going to another college. And here, rankings aren't especially important, but instead, what do they provide you that another college doesn't? And so that's the approach that I took when attempting to construct my college list.
I've often heard, or we've often heard of reach colleges, and colleges like that you put into a category of sorts. How does that system work? Did you use that?
So I think the system that you're referring to is the idea of a reach school, a target school, and a safety school. And so this is a very sound system, and I did use this. And it basically ensures that you do have some college to go to. It's basically a safety net that allows you to apply to a couple of schools in the safety net, which say that if all else fails, like if I don't go to any other colleges that I want to go to, I can at least, I know I'm going to get into these colleges. So it's a way of protecting you from the future, kind of like insurance. You know that you're going to get into them. And so you need to have these colleges so that you're not worried about the future if nothing else happens. If everything else fails, you have something you can fall back onto. And then the target schools typically talk about the schools that you would like to go to, things that you aren't sure if you're going to get into, but you think you have a good chance. And so these are the colleges which most people apply to as your mid-tier schools or things that you really want. And then there's your high-tier schools, your upper limit, which you are pretty sure you're not going to get into. And so these are your reach schools, things that you're trying to reach for in some sense. And so these are colleges which you don't want to apply a lot of, because if you do, you might, risk the chance of not having enough in your target or not having enough in your safety. So that's a general reasoning behind the system. And I think many students should follow that, and I think do follow that for the same reasons that I did.
If you don't mind me asking, what were some colleges other than MIT that were your dream schools or your reach schools?
Yeah, so I had dream schools of, like many students do, of going to Stanford, Harvard, and those kind of schools. And I also applied to, University of Washington, which is really, really good here in the state of Washington. So I applied to many different schools, in that kind of region. But for the same reasons that I applied to MIT, for, they had really, really good resources, which I could use and further my development and passions.
Thank you. So now we would like to move on to test scores in high school statistics. So we all know about the SAT and the ACT. Which test is often better? Because some people say the ACT is better. Is it individualized?
I think it really is highly individualized. To give a very general blanket statement about which test one should take is a misnomer, and it's kind of ignorant in some sense, because it's important to realize that students have different abilities, different ways of testing, different preferences for testing, and it's important to take those into account when deciding which test to take. So I would say that there's certain things that SAT does better for some students and ACT does better for other students. So for example, the SAT generally gives you less time per question, but it gives you, the SAT gives you more time per question, but it tests on stuff that you may not be fully familiar with. Like it tests more on application of previously known ideas, whereas the ACT gives you less time per question, but tests you on familiar concepts. So there's one difference that you might want to look at. The ACT also has a science section, whereas the SAT does not. So it's important to take into account, do you like those subjects? Do you not like those subjects? There's a different approach when it comes to the writing sections on both of them. And so it's important to realize, what is my strengths, what are my weaknesses? And I think we can really extrapolate this to things beyond the SAT and ACT, whereas it's important to have that idea of, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses, and apply that to a general problem. And so I think it depends highly on the student. I can't give you a full answer on that one.
Okay. So what is a good range of scores for wanting to go to a competitive college on both the SAT and ACT?
So I would suggest on the SAT anywhere around 1500 plus is a good score for competitive schools. And then on the ACT, an equivalent might be 34 plus. And so those are the scores that you would want to target if you're applying to a competitive school.
Okay. How about GPA? Because there's always a range of GPAs that are accepted into colleges and universities. A perfect 4.0 is always wanted, but are 3.9s and 2.8s also preferred?
Yeah, so I think it's important to realize that it's a very subjective matter. College admissions isn't really a strict boundary of sorts. So you always have that leeway. Like even with the SAT and ACT scores, it's important to realize that if you don't get within that metric, you still have a chance. It's not like you don't have any chance and you're going to get discarded almost instantly. And so similarly, if you apply to a competitive school with a GPA of a 3.8 or a 3.9, you still have a lot of really good chances. It depends on multiple factors. And I can't say for sure that having a low GPA is going to disqualify you. But to look for the most ideal GPAs, I would suggest, 3.9 plus. but do keep in mind that is flexible.
Okay. So colleges often like to see a student that has taken hard courses such as AP courses, honors, and IB. How much weight do these classes have on an application?
So colleges themselves have reported many statistics on this issue and many other issues. And you can see that the rigor of the courses taken is generally viewed as a very important thing in college admissions. So I would say that having AP and honors courses is important for college admissions. At the same time, I do warn students from taking too many AP and honors courses. What I see is many students become competitive about taking the most number of AP courses or the most number of honors courses, and they forget that they only have a limited amount of time to do anything else. The amount of time they have in a week is set, and you can't change that. And it's important to realize that if you take more AP courses or more challenging courses, you have less time to do other things that you may like. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons why students don't end up, doing so well if they take so many AP courses or so many, honors courses, because they're pushing their boundaries too far and they're losing on things that they like to do. And colleges also remember that as well. They know that students only have a limited amount of time and are willing to realize that students may have not taken AP courses in some subjects in order to focus on other things outside of school that are perhaps more significant. And so it's important to find that balance for every student and then find what do I like to do and what do I not like to do. And then perhaps challenge yourself in the things that you think you're good at, in the fields that you're not so, that you're not so scared about. For example, personally, math is a very, it's a subject that I'm confident in. And so I challenge myself a lot in that subject. Whereas in science, I didn't push myself as hard. I challenged myself with a lot of courses, but I decided not to do anything more than taking some basic requirements. And so, because I realized that science, pure sciences to some degree, weren't my most favorite thing. And so I pushed myself to a certain boundary within them. So the courses that I took, I definitely challenged myself. I took AP courses, but I didn't do more than that. So I think it's important to realize that there are some things where you can compromise and still do well on. It all depends back on that passion topic that I come back to, passion and interest. It's important to realize what do you like, what do you not like to do, and then fit your schedule around that instead of the other way around.
Um, we've always heard a lot of opinions regarding the value of an AP test, which is usually taken after the end of an AP course. In reality, as someone who's probably taken a lot of AP tests and a lot of AP courses, how much do AP scores actually have an impact on your chances of admission? Do they add or do they not have a great value?
So AP scores, they can only have any value after you get into the college. So after you get into a specific college, you can use the credits that you earn from your scores to get transfer credits technically from that college. And so they don't really add any value before admissions. They only add value after. And so to answer that question, I think they're not that significant, but having good scores will definitely add to your application.
We've always heard of the difference between weighted and unweighted GPAs. For many schools, high schools, taking a weighted GPA is not available because people don't know what their weighted GPA is. Could you briefly explain what a weighted GPA is?
Yeah, so a weighted GPA is essentially a way of taking your regular GPA and then taking into account the rigor of the courses that you took. So the normal way that a GPA is calculated, it takes each course, takes the grade that you got, and then converts it to a number. And then that number is used in an average to create your GPA. Now, a weighted GPA does that exact same process, but instead of each grade counting as one, each class, if it's a regular class, it might be worth 1 point. If it's an honors course, it might be worth 1.2 points. If it's an AP course, it might be worth 1.3 points, something like that, where there's a specific weighted score that's given depending on how rigorous the course is. And this gives you an overall GPA when weighted that could be slightly higher, that could be slightly lower. than your GPA. It all depends on the metrics that you took. So for me, for example, I took 14 APs, and if I calculate that out, I get something that's higher than 4.0. And so that's just an example.
Mhm. So what is the range of a good weighted GPA? As we talked about, an unweighted GPA being between 3.9 and higher than that.
Yeah,
What is
so I would say that most colleges, they typically they don't look at more on the weighted GPAs and give you a range of that, but they take you and your GPA in comparison with your students in the same school. So they compare you to your friends or your peers, and they give you a percentile, and they use that percentile to tell how well you did with respect to that school. And so you're not going to be compared with students across the nation, but students within your school. Um, so if you really want to go to a competitive school, I would suggest trying to maintain a high percentile overall. Doing well among your peers is what they're looking for there. Yeah, to answer the question, it's hard. I think it depends on school to school, the way they do it.
certain schools, certain colleges look for a top percent in your class, like your 10 in your whole school.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do many schools do that? Do many high schools give that information, or is it just some high schools?
So I'm pretty sure that many high schools do give that information, but they don't provide it to students. Um, it's more commonly referred to as a class rank. Um, and to be fairly honest, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that high schools do give this kind of information to colleges to provide perspective on the student.
Thank you. Now we would like to move on to the final aspect being your high school journey. If you're comfortable sharing this, are there any challenges you faced and overcame um, from high school to college admission?
Yeah. So I'll be really honest here that I think most people in our generation face very few issues. We have abundant access to knowledge through the internet, through Google, Wikipedia, whatever. We have access to technology that people, 15 years back didn't have. We have amazing resources at our fingertips through our phones, through, social media and everything. And we don't really have many problems. Most of us are living, in comfortable homes. We have access to really anything we need. We don't have to worry about our financial status. And so I think that if we talk about any issues that we have, it seems kind of naive compared to the rest of the world. And if I have to say any challenges that I personally faced, and many students do face, is there's so many distractions that come with this abundant access to the internet. And it's important to remain, steadfast on our goals and, having that discipline to not shift from what we want and what we want to achieve. I would say that's the biggest, challenge that any student really has to face, me included. And then one other would probably be, time management. How to manage your time with all of the different things that we have to look at, schoolwork, maintaining good grades, how to manage your time with regards to extracurricular activities, intracurricular activities, parents, relationships with other friends and peers, maintaining that social network, everything. It's really hard to manage your time at such a young age, and then at the same time not be distracted by all these elements. And so I would say those are the two biggest challenges that I personally face. I know many students also faced.
You talked about having a goal and working towards it. In your case, what are some effective strategies to work towards a goal and achieving it?
So I'd say the first thing that any student needs to do is identify their goal. And I think here is where most students trip up. They usually set their goal to be a college or a job. And I think in some sense it's kind of conceited to think about such a short-term goal. And I think it's kind of paradoxical to say that looking 4 years down the line is short-term, but in reality it really is. We're not looking any past that. And only looking for these 4 years is it doesn't show real understanding of the problems ahead. instead, what students should focus on, instead of looking at colleges and jobs, is what they like to do. Identifying your true passion is going to be the most important goal that you have to establish at a very young age. Having that goal and understanding what you need to do is going to be that guiding factor for you later on. And so it's important to identify that. And I think there are some steps that one can take to identify that. I think the first thing to understand is that a passion is merely an extension of your interests. It's just more of a dedicated application of your interests. And so the first thing that any student needs to do is identify their interests. What do they like to do? What do you not like to do? And so separating those two things, and then from the strengths or things that you like to do, start developing them, start working on them day in and day out, pouring hours and hours and hours into each one of them until you start to really like it and enjoy it. And you'll understand through this process whether you really like it or not. And if you really like it, that starts to become your passion. And when it becomes your passion, it starts to shift away from something that you have to do to something you want to do. And that perspective change is where the magic happens. When you can understand that this is something you want to do, it becomes something that's fun for you. It becomes something that you want to keep doing instead of other things. And so it's that gripping motivation that takes you further, it takes you to real heights in life, really. And so I think in my life, that's what I did. I took my basic interests of problem solving and puzzles and riddles, which I loved to do as a kid, and then I started developing it. And eventually I happened to hit upon computer science as a topic. And so from here, I started to apply myself and found those elements that I loved. I love the ability to problem solve. I love the ability to use logic in computer science and code, and then find ways to relate that back to the real world, and then solving issues that we face in society. And then you start to see those parallels between the work that I do and the work that I love to do. And then eventually CS, computer science, starts to develop as a passion for me. And that's the only thing I really focused on for most of my work. For most of my projects, I think about what I wanted to do, and then I just went and did it. I didn't really think about what would I get out of this? Would colleges like to see this? Is this something I should do for admissions? Those details didn't really bother me because I know that it's something I wanted to do, and if I did it with enough passion, it end up great. And so those kind of details is all I looked at, and that's how I started to develop my passion. And eventually, my passion is what led me, I would say, to get accepted into college. And so that goal setting of finding your passion, it helps you not only identify what you like to do and love in your life, it helps you achieve things as a byproduct. You don't have to start thinking about success. It starts to follow when you love what you do.
So we earlier talked about passion. Is there any possibility of having multiple passions? And in that case, how do you project it to a potential college admission?
So I think, as I said before, I've had multiple passions. Like I love to do debate. Debate is really interesting to me because it's really an extension of a person's psyche or cognitive thinking and how that reflects in an argument. And so the way I showed it is starting to do activities in it. I like to do, debate through, youth and government. And then there is where I develop my interest and my passion for that. And so the real way to show this interest or convey your interest or passion in something is through your activities section and through your essays. If you really have a passion for something, your love for that topic naturally starts to come out in your writing. There's no real pressure because you don't have to think much because it just comes out naturally. You're just writing what you like and the writing just flows. It's super smooth. It makes sense to the reader. They can feel that love that you have for that topic. And so that's the best way to convey anything about passion to an admissions officer. They can read it and feel it. They can feel the emotions in the writing. And so I would focus on that. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about not having a dependence on technology in a bad way. I mean, not spending too much time on your phone and things like that. I know some of your peers have also gotten into very good colleges. what are some of the characteristics that successful high school students, I mean, in terms of success, it's getting into a good college. That may not be the end goal, but that is a milestone of success.
Yeah.
What are some of the characteristics and what are some things that they do to maintain that?
So I think most students who are successful have, a few characteristics that we share. For example, we're really dedicated in whatever we, like to do. You'll see a lot of dedication and passion for things. You'll see that we are often not distracted easily. We focus on our goals and we realize that there are certain, factors outside that can easily distract someone. And then maintaining that focus is essential to achieving your goals. And so that dedication, that passion, that determination to stick to your goals and then not deviate from them is a skill that you'll see that's within a lot of successful students. You'll also see that a lot of us have a lot of grit. And by that, I mean, we're fairly resilient. You'll see that most of us fail, a lot. And failure is extremely important. It teaches you many lessons that success does not teach. And most students who don't have grit will easily be dissuaded from a path after failure. But many successful students will continue to pick themselves back up and then work through those challenges and then work through their failures. So I would say these three things are, important. They work really hard, but it's not only them working hard; they work hard correctly. What I mean by that is they do their work in such a way that they're applying effort, but at the same time they're conserving effort by the way that they're practicing. One example that I can give to kind of clear this up is if we're imagining a test that's upcoming, many smart students, or high achieving students will tend to do multiple practice exams before the exam, before the real test. They'll start to do it in chunks. And when they're doing that, it's reinforcing the skills through application. They're not memorizing any details. They're just applying it in different scenarios. So they're automatically memorizing it, memorizing the information, but at the same time, they're applying it, which is helpful for the exam because that's really what the exam is. It's an application of the things you know. Whereas other students may just be memorizing their information or memorizing their notes or whatnot, which doesn't allow you to properly apply that knowledge on the exam. And so many students who are attempting to be high achievers, have these characteristics that they develop over time. And so I would say those four are important.
So you also talked about time management and keeping yourself on track. With distractions around you at most of the times, what are some techniques for people who are trying to get into the groove to keep themselves at where they are or progress forward, not backwards?
So I would say perhaps the easiest way of maintaining or not being distracted is to just keep in mind the goals that one has. When you think about the goals that you want to achieve, it gives you an inner motivation, that intrinsic motivation that you need to remain on that path that you're on right now. You won't be as distracted when you realize the significance of what you're doing and the eventual goal that you're working towards. And so that's one of the techniques that I used. I also, used schedules sometimes, like it depends, of course. I won't use it all the time, but I had schedules planned out, timetables, I had, working with friends sometimes that helps, especially when you're working on difficult problems. You can use help from outside, peers to properly manage time and then distribute the work. And so these are some of the techniques that I used. But perhaps once again, the biggest thing would just be to keep in mind what you're working towards. It gives you that, motivation to keep going.
So I think the major themes of this whole interview has been finding yourself a passion and working towards it by setting yourself goals.
Yeah.
So those are all the questions that we have. I will just take a look at the chat and then we can get started on the Q&A session, which you guys in the audience can speak up, but please put your name in the chat so that we can go one by one so that no one overlaps someone else's. And Siddharth, this Q&A, this whole interview is being live telecasted on YouTube. It's being live streamed on the Woman Icon channel. I will post a link as soon as everyone starts to put their name in the chat for the Q&A when they have questions. So if you do have questions, just put your name in the chat and I will go through each one of them, calling you out, and then you can speak up and ask Revanth questions directly. So we just got one question asking on how parents can support students in terms of their goals, in terms of finding their passions, and in terms of achieving their goals. Tell me some of your experiences.
Yeah, so parents usually watch over their kids. They've been able to see their kids grow from day one to where they are now, and so they can identify their strengths and weaknesses fairly easily because they can see where they've improved over time. And with that perspective, I think parents can really help in telling the kids what I think you may be able to do, what I think you can't do as well yet, and then where I think you can find your passion. So helping them identify what they may be good at and what they may like to do as an interest. I think parents can really be useful there. And then they can also, of course, be useful in helping the students develop their passion from there, helping them, gain knowledge or spend time working on different things, finding what they may like. And then after they find what they like in terms of projects or in terms of developing, they can help them solidify this abstract concept of passion or interest or whatever into a tangible concept. They can help them during that process as well. And I think once the student reaches that point where they have that passion, I think parents can help in other areas because the student will take off on their own. They'll start to do things that we don't even think are possible, but that's just because they really like that subject. I think the next place that they can really help is in terms of essays. I know I personally struggled to find things that I did during my high school, time, and my parents were really helpful and crucial in identifying what I did, what I didn't do, and what I can use as potential topics for my essays. And so I think keeping an eye on what they've done and helping them through this process is perhaps the most important thing and what I think parents can work on. Yeah.
So we have another question, which is, what are some other colleges you have gotten into and why you chose MIT specifically?
So I think there were two colleges which I was really contemplating between, in addition to MIT, which was UW Seattle, Direct Computer Science, and University of Toronto, Mississauga. Both of them are highly respected in the computer science field and in their respective countries. University of Toronto is in Canada, University of Washington. So I think I chose between. Go ahead.
Sorry, go with. There was an echo.
So I chose MIT over these two, in particular, simply because it provides more research opportunities. Both of these schools have ample amount of research opportunities. They're located close to tech hubs as well. But I think MIT shines a little bit brighter than these two. For example, they do more prominent research as opposed to UW or University of Toronto, and they're more at the forefront. And I think that's what helped me choose between those two. And so.
So another question is about your study schedule. How many hours a day do you study? How does your typical day look like?
Yeah, so I would say on a typical basis, I may study around, after coming back from school, maybe 3 hours or 4 hours. I would spend a lot of time on personal projects. And so, for example, to highlight the day, I would, get up, I would go to school and come back at around 3 o'clock. I might do some homework if it's some projects until 7. I would spend some time outside for half an hour, and then I would work until usually 9, which at that point I would eat dinner and then I would go to sleep. And so I would work on my project for at least 2 hours a day. I would study for 3 to 4 hours, and then I would spend some time outside to kind of relax and also exercise, which is important. And I'd also sleep at an earlier time than most students do, because I also understand that students need a lot of sleep as well. It's important for brain development and just in general relaxation.
So another question we have gotten in the chat is someone asking about the IB program. Their school offers it, and they're wondering if colleges give enough credit to this.
Yeah, so the IB program is just as equally weighted as the AP program. I've heard some remarks around how IB may be a bit more work than AP, but in terms of overall weightage, they're perfectly even.
Another question we have gotten is when does one start preparing for the SAT or the ACT exam? When is the perfect time to start? And how do you initiate that process?
Yeah, so I personally started in 10th grade. 10th grade in summer, I would say, is roughly when I started. But I would suggest most people start at early 10th grade. Just taking some practical exams or taking a look at what type of questions are offered, understanding what type of exam you want to take, whether you want to take the SAT or ACT, and then start working on some problems or practicing. If you want to take a look of how to start the process of registering, I would highly recommend College Board or the ACT website. Google is often really helpful here. And I would just suggest, starting off with understanding what do you want to do, whether it's the ACT or SAT, understanding the differences between the two, and then analyzing, what are your strengths and weaknesses and which one you should take to, perform better.
Another question we've gotten is someone talking about advertisements for college admission, if whether advertisements are really helpful or not.
So these college agencies, one thing that I've noticed is the advertisement for college agencies, which aim at helping students write their essays better or plan high school. Problems that I've seen with those are it's highly standardized. Many students will be placed in the same bucket. They'll be doing very similar projects, and they'll have very similar essays. You lose creativity in that process. It's hard for you to stand out as an individual, and you'll just be like the rest of the group. It's hard for you to really, express yourself and blossom as an individual through these kind of programs. And so I would suggest not to stray on that path, but to instead, find someone especially for essays, which I think most people are looking forward to, whether to take an agency or not. For essays, I would find someone who is both good at writing and has a good grip on the English language, but at the same time knows the student personally. So the person who I found knew me for 2 years, and they were really good at English, and they know me as an individual, as in what I mean by that is they know what I like, they know who I am, and they were able to read my essay and they were able to tell me whether the essay that they read matched me as a person. And so in other words, they were able to say if the person that they read from those essays was similar enough to who I am. And they would give me back that feedback as to, this essay doesn't seem like you, this one does seem like you. And with that kind of input, I would be able to change the essay in a way that I see is, my voice, my ideas, and what seems right to me. And so I would suggest not taking that path, but instead just identifying these things on your own. I think it's much easier, and you're going to see better results.
Another question was if whether you went to any prep center or study center for the SAT or ACT prep.
So I personally did go to a study center, but I would say that, there you have to be careful. There are some study centers which aren't that great, and there are some which are good. So I would do a lot of research. I think it's important because there are some which, once again, fall into that path of college agency where it's highly standardized. The quality isn't as good. And then there's some which are really, really good. So I would say, take the time to understand what is good and what isn't.
Another question we've gotten is if whether or not you have taken the help of a college counselor or high school counselor with admission.
So no, I have not. But what I will say is when you refer to a high school counselor, it's important to realize that many schools do have high school counselors, and you should maintain a relation with them. What I mean by that is many students fail to understand both their teachers and their high school counselor on a personal level. They just don't have that connection with them, and they suffer a lot because of that. For example, when you don't have that personal relationship with the teacher doesn't really understand who you are, and they won't be able to write to you a good letter of recommendation, and they won't be able to help you a lot in class either. And this goes back to some topics we touched upon before, for example, study tips. One thing that I really did was I connected with my teachers on a personal level. And what that helped me was they were more willing to help me when I had questions. They were able to, give me really detailed questions or answers about whatever I needed. And that was only because I viewed them as not a teacher, but more of a person. Like I treated them as if they were a real person. I would talk to them a lot. I would, I would maintain that personal connection with them. And this helps when you are looking at personal growth. When you're looking at high school as a place for you to learn and grow, simply for the reason of learning. When you look at it like that, maintaining that relationship with the teacher is essential because it gives you the opportunity to be active in class, for you to participate, for you to, get proper feedback, and among many other benefits. And so maintaining that relationship is important in properly studying. And it's also important in getting proper letter of recommendations, which is essential for college admission. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, I did have personal relations, but I did not use a college counselor. No.
Another question we've gotten is that it looks like you are very into CS and are going to study it.
Yeah.
We were asking for some examples of extracurricular activities or computer science related activities that you participated in or you would recommend.
So one thing that I recommend is projects, especially if you're in the CS field. Personal projects are essential. It's the best way, at least that's what I feel. I think it's the best way to learn, best way to explore different topics and projects and ideas, really. And so I would look into those. There's many different projects. You can find one for beginners, one for intermediate, one for advanced. You can also find, different competitions for different, levels, beginner, intermediate, advanced. Once again, I would suggest TSA or Teams Code or many different events like that. You'll find a lot.
I think this might be our last question, but what are your opinions on letter of recommendations and how do you successfully get them? I know you talked about having a personal connection with the teacher, but are there other tactics or things you can do?
So I think it's important to understand that teachers, when they write a letter of recommendation, they want to be as genuine as possible. It's like writing a college essay. They want to portray who you are as a student and as an individual. So if you can, try to maintain a relationship outside of the classroom. So working on projects with them or even going on field trips with them, you can establish that outside of the classroom experience with them. For example, one of the teachers that I, had as a letter of recommendation was my, high school. He was my teacher in high school for U.S. government, and he was also the mentor for our TSA chapter. So he helped me there because he saw me when I went to nationals. He saw who I was as a competitor, who I was as a student, who I was as a person, really. And so he had that experience both in school and out of school. And I also had a teacher who I worked a lot with on a personal project um, outside of school. So I had both those experiences with both the professors that I had. And so I had in school and out of school experience, and having positive reactions to both will get you a blazingly, really, really good letter of recommendation.
Thank you, Raven. Oh, we just got another question. What is a good age to start programming or learning computer science?
So, I mean, the most generic answer is there really isn't one, but I would say, I would start sixth grade or seventh grade because I think at that time, many students have good foundations in math, science, and English. Um, and so those foundations really help when dealing with computer science. And so perhaps middle school, sixth grade or seventh grade.
So I think that's all the questions we can do. We're running a little low on time. So first of all, thank you very much, Revanth, for coming and sharing your high school experience with us. Thanks a lot. I would really like to thank you and thank the participants for asking such wonderful questions to highlight a lot of the questions that some of you may have, and the people who are watching on the YouTube Live. There is a recording of this on YouTube. Go to Woman Icon's YouTube channel, and I might also send this in the Woman Icon chat or WhatsApp chat, the link to the live stream. So
And thank you, everyone. It was really fun, answering all these questions. It was entertaining. So thank you, Vishnu.
all the best, Trayvon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.